Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Trapped for 60 hours. Imagine being stuck in a cave underwater for days. In 2017, 54-year-old Cisco Gracia found himself in the worst position imaginable when he became trapped in an underwater cave for 60 hours. At one point, Cisco started hallucinating from the carbon dioxide poisoning. He believed he was going to die, so he had his knife clenched in one hand. He was prepared to give himself a quick death rather than slowly and painfully running out of oxygen. Thankfully, though, it never came to that. He sat alone in utter darkness, and he only survived because he found an air pocket within a submerged rock chamber. The father of two was in that air pocket for over 2 days without food or clean air, thinking about how his kids were going to grow up without him. But when the situation became so dire that he thought there was no way out, he used the last bit of life he had to swim across to where he'd abandoned his gear, and that was where he picked up the knife. Cisco Gracia, a geology teacher in Mallorca, is an extremely experienced diver who spends most of his weekends mapping the Spanish island's subterranean labyrinths. He initially went into the Sa Piqueta cave system with a friend, thinking it would just be another day. He swam underwater for about an hour to reach a daunting network of caverns a half-mile from the entrance. Then Cisco started collecting rock samples, while his partner swam off to chart a different chamber. Everything was fine until they tried to make their way out of the caves, and things only became more difficult when they accidentally stirred up silt from the ground, making it impossible to see their way forward. That was when Cisco and his diving partner, Guillem Mascaro, realized that their guideline had snapped, meaning he and his partner had no way to reach the outside world. They spent about an hour looking for the exit, but it was no use. By that point, they only had enough oxygen for one of them to try and find their way out of the cavern. Cisco agreed to stay behind while Guillem went for help, and after 60 hours, Cisco was positive his friend had died trying to escape. But then, as he was on the brink of death, rescue divers appeared and saved his life. It was a close call, but he made it, even if it was by the skin of his teeth. And now for number 7. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Thyronel and Lucy Moon. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. We wouldn't be here without you. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Petty John's Cave. Petty John's Cave isn't for the faint of heart. It's located on the east side of Pigeon Mountain in Georgia, twisting 31,490 feet through dark and blackened corridors. The cave only reaches a maximum depth of 235 feet, but the passageways are seemingly endless. One of the most popular places is the Echo Room, a vast chamber where the echoing sound can make you feel like you've entered another dimension. But the only way to reach it is through the Worm Tube, which is 150 feet of pure nightmare fuel. While traveling through the Worm Tube, you're forced to crawl on your hands and knees, yet it's still one of the most popular features in the cave. On the other hand, though, one of the least popular highlights of the cavern is a feature known as high anxiety. It was in high anxiety where YouTubers from the Action Adventure Twins channel recently found themselves in a tight spot. The YouTubers visited the cave once before, but had to turn around because of high water. On their second attempt, though, things were even worse. They dragged themselves by their fingers through a space that was nearly too narrow for their bodies. The explorers could have easily gotten stuck, but they managed to force their way through, and in the end, they learned the hard way why the area is called high anxiety. The Alppasat Cave Rescue. In March 2004, 6 British soldiers got stuck in the Alppasat caverns of Mexico. The team included military personnel from all different branches, like the Royal Navy and the British Army. They were part of the Combined Services Caving Association, and the expedition into the cave was meant as an official military exercise to support adventure training. 6 of the men went into the cavern, and they were expected to return after 36 hours. What nobody had anticipated was that a flash flood would block their exit. The 6 divers couldn't escape the cave and had to hide in their emergency camp. They waited on a small ledge overlooking a subterranean river, which must have felt like they'd gone back into the Stone Age. Luckily, though, these were military men, and they had planned for the worst-case scenario. They had enough food to survive, so being stuck turned into a sort of impromptu camping trip. They had pasta with cheese and instant chocolate cake. They even had a portable stove to cook their cake in. Their lights were also water-powered, so they didn't have to sit around in darkness. But just because they were camping doesn't mean they were enjoying themselves. The flood was getting closer minute by minute. The men could hear the booming and crashing as water continuously filled the cavern they were in. It was also insanely hot inside, so the men sat around in their underwear with nowhere to go. For 8 days, the trapped soldiers hunkered down in the cave. This was partially because the team members who were outside the cave waited 5 days before they alerted Mexican authorities. The British hadn't told Mexico that they were sending military personnel into their caves, and as a result, rumors spread that the soldiers were looking for uranium ore. The whole thing was a political fiasco, but luckily, in the end, the rescue attempt was successful. All 6 divers were brought out of the passage unscathed. Tragedy in Peak District Cavern. In March of 1959, a young adventurer named Neil Moss found himself in an unexpected predicament within the depths of the Peak District Cavern, a cave that had earned its reputation as one of England's spookiest underground areas. Neil, who was a 20-year-old and a dedicated philosophy student at Oxford University, embarked on this extraordinary journey as one of the 8 daring souls that made up the caving team. Their mission that fateful day was to explore a passage that was located roughly half a mile from the cave's entrance, a passage that had been unveiled just 2 weeks prior. Neil, who stood 6 feet tall, was the first to embark on this subterranean journey. However, he was unaware that his stature might prove to be a handicap when it came to navigating the narrow cave shafts. Upon reaching the newfound cavern, Neil carefully maneuvered ladders and equipment into the narrow entrance, unintentionally plunging into a labyrinth that twisted like a corkscrew. As fate would have it, Neil became trapped among the ladders he'd pushed ahead, wedging himself within an elliptical slit that was a mere 18 inches wide. Initially, the situation seemed manageable. The rest of the team rallied to his aid, tossing down ropes in a valiant effort to extract Neil from his compressed prison. However, hope dwindled as the ropes snapped one after the other, and their rescue attempts remained frustratingly futile. The predicament escalated when Neil's position prevented him from accessing fresh air, causing the atmosphere to grow increasingly toxic. It wasn't just Neil either. The rescuers began to succumb to the suffocating carbon dioxide as well. Then, in a heart-wrenching turn of events, 3 brave volunteers lost consciousness while striving to save Neil. By the time additional oxygen supplies arrived, the situation had spiraled out of control. Confusion and disorientation enveloped the rescuers, rendering them helpless in their desperate bid to reach Neil's position. The exact moment of Neil's passing remained shrouded in uncertainty, but it was sometime around 3:00 a.m. on March 24, 1959, when the cavern's depths claimed the young explorer. Trapped on Vancouver Island, Andrew Munoz of British Columbia, Canada, was eager to explore a remote cave system on Vancouver Island in December 2015. Andrew and his friends set out to cascade in a wild and isolated part of the island. Most of them were experienced, especially Andrew, who had done a lot of caving and worked as a paramedic. The group reached the cave system and began descending. They went 300 feet down into the cave, past a roaring waterfall, and through a narrow passageway known as Bastard's Crawl. They traveled through the passage one by one, but before they all made it to the other side, a man named Jason Story got stuck. The pressure was so intense as the water unexpectedly rose that Jason got sucked into the hole, where he was wedged in deep, and at the same time, water started to build up around him. He was stuck in the passage and was about to drown, but Andrew heard Jason cry out and immediately did everything in his power to help him. Working together, Andrew managed to get Jason out of the hole after spending 25 minutes mostly underwater. But then there was another problem. They were stuck in the cave, and Jason was shivering from the freezing cold water. Unfortunately, he was already in the first stage of hypothermia and had no way out. Luckily, though, Andrew and Jason were the only two who had gotten stuck in the cavern. They were able to tell their friends to escape and get help, but Andrew was well aware that they wouldn't be escaping until at least the next day. It was a long and terrible evening, with Jason slipping deeper into a hypothermic state. At 6:30 a.m., Andrew checked and saw that the water had gone down a little. They went to make their escape, but they would only have one chance. If Jason got stuck again, they would be completely out of options. It was a miracle that the two men made it out of the cave themselves. They even passed the equipment that was left behind by the rescuers in the middle of the night who had tried to reach them. When they emerged from the cave, the rescue team was standing around with bone saws that they were planning to take into the cavern so that they could remove Andrew and Jason's bodies. They were absolutely shocked to see the men alive. The Plura Cave disaster. In 2014, 5 experienced Finnish divers embarked upon a journey into the depths of Norway's Plura Cave. It's one of the most frightening caves in the world, and it was carved by the raging currents of the Plura River over hundreds of years. Its waters are icy, its passages are narrow, and its chambers are extremely deadly. The entrance to the cave is also blocked by ice, so the 5 divers had to smash their way inside the underwater system. About an hour into the dive, things started to go south. Jari Huotarinen had gotten tangled in a cord that was connected to a part of his equipment. He was panicking, meaning he was breathing too fast. When lead diver Patrick Gronqvist tried to give Jari a cylinder of gas to reduce the carbon dioxide in his system, Jari messed up when he attempted to switch the mouthpieces. Suddenly, he started to swallow water, and that was it. Jari was dead within moments, right in front of Patrick's eyes. Patrick would survive the ordeal, but not before another death. When Jari Uusimäki reached Jari Huotarinen's body, he got stuck behind it and panicked. As a result, he too died in the same spot. The other 3 divers made it out after 11 hours in what was supposed to be a 5-hour dive. They suffered from serious decompression sickness, but the rest of the team made full recoveries. The bottomless hole. On May 28, 1973, 4 recreational scuba divers drowned in a flooded sinkhole in South Australia. The entrance to the sinkhole is a diabolical feature that's known as the shaft. Discovered in 1938, the shaft is basically a bottomless pit, something you really wouldn't expect just by looking at it. The hole is located on a small patch of ground near Mount Gambier. When adventurers learned of its existence, they started traveling to the sinkhole to explore its depths. Through a tiny gap, adventurers descend into a clear water cave. The main chamber is enormous and relatively safe for experienced divers. Prior to 1973, there were no incidents whatsoever. But then, 8 divers entered the shaft with the idea that they'd explore beyond the main water chamber. And unfortunately, half of them never made it out alive. Robert Smith was the first diver to realize it was time to go. He started to feel the effects of nitrogen narcosis when they reached a depth of 180 feet. So he returned to the surface, where he found Larry Reynolds waiting for him. Glenn Millett also returned to the surface, and shortly after, Peter Burr arrived with almost no air in his tank. The other 4 divers should have been right behind them, since they wouldn't have had much air left, but sadly, they never came back up. Nobody really knows what happened to the 4 divers, but it's likely that they became disoriented as they began to run out of air. Their bodies weren't found until over 8 months later. Stephen and Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts, and John Bokerman are still the only 4 people to die in Australia's bottomless hole. Mark Dicki. Mark Dicki will never stop cave diving despite his recent brush with death. In September 2023, Mark got stuck at an insane depth inside a Turkish cave. You've heard stories today about people getting stuck 100 to 200 feet deep, but Mark beats all of them because he got jammed at an astonishing depth of 3,000 feet. On September 2nd, the 40-year-old caver was exploring Turka's Morka cave system when he suddenly got sick. Out of nowhere, he began vomiting blood, which is one of the worst things that can happen when you're 3,000 feet deep in a cave. He didn't know what was going on, only that things were getting worse. More blood was coming up, so Mark knew that he needed to get back to camp immediately. Thankfully, he had a radio which allowed him to request a rescue from the team above ground. Mark wasn't in the cave by himself. He was with his partner, Jessica Van Ord. Jessica is a trained paramedic as well as a trained rescuer, so technically, she was the first rescuer on the scene. She was also acutely aware of how dire the situation was. Mark was in so much pain that he curled up in the fetal position and barfed blood on himself. The issue wasn't that Mark was physically stuck, it was that he couldn't get himself out. Rescue teams brought blood and fluids to keep him alive, all while trying to figure out how to get his body to the surface without killing him. It was a rescue attempt that took 200 volunteers and 11 full days. For almost 2 weeks, Mark was cocooned on a stretcher and was hooked to an IV with his paramedic partner by his side. Things could have been significantly worse had he been alone. In the end, it turned out that he had internal bleeding. However, doctors weren't able to figure out why. Even after such a nightmare though, Mark says he'll never stop caving. Thanks for watching. Would you dare to go cave exploring, or have you already? What was your wildest experience? Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Bear versus mountain biker. In May of this year, a mountain biker was severely injured after being attacked by a bear. 60-year-old Peter Scherfig was riding his mountain bike in Big Sky, Montana, when he turned a sharp corner on a trail and most likely startled a large grizzly bear. The biker fought the bear off and was able to escape. He somehow made it to a road and got help from a passing car. His injuries were so severe he was airlifted to emergency care with serious face and neck injuries, which required reconstructive surgery. A Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks investigation theorized that the 60-something-year-old victim unintentionally alarmed the bear and that it wasn't a predatory attack. Thankfully, Scherfig is expected to fully recover. Apparently, there is a big debate in these areas as to how much cyclists affect grizzly bears. Scientists say a lot. The Mountain Journal reports that Dr. Christopher Servheen, professor in the Department of Ecosystem and Conservation Sciences at the University of Montana, has spent 40 years in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's grizzly bear recovery team. He says, "I do believe that mountain bikes are a grave threat to bears, both grizzly and black bears, for many reasons. Mostly the high speed and quiet human activity scares the bears because it catches them by surprise." In 2016, a cyclist was killed after running into a bear at high speed in Montana. Also, bikers don't usually carry bear spray or guns. Mountain bikers argue that there is no evidence that they are affecting wildlife and would actually like more trails. What do you think about this situation? Would you go mountain biking in a park? Or have you? What was your experience like? Let me know in the comments below. Gorilla attacks zookeeper. A zookeeper at the Madrid Zoo and Aquarium in Spain received the scare of a lifetime in September when a 440-pound gorilla somehow bypassed 3 security doors and attacked her. Malabo, a 29-year-old great ape, entered the supposedly secure enclosure and mauled the 46-year-old employee while she served breakfast. Fellow staff members removed the animal and veterinarians then administered a tranquilizer dart. The 19-year veteran of the zoo, who suffered 2 broken arms and head and chest injuries, was rushed to the hospital in serious condition. Raised at the zoo since birth, Malabo is normally close to his caregivers, according to the zoo. The cause of the unprovoked attack and how the gorilla got past 3 security doors are being looked into. The reasons why the animal was able to access the area are being investigated internally, the zoo said on its Facebook page. Meanwhile, some activists are pointing the finger at the zoo, suggesting that inadequate provisions, including enclosures that are too small, are to blame for Malabo's unpredictable behavior. Ramy Island Crocodile Massacre. Things were already looking grim for the Japanese military in 1945, as the country began losing heavily to the Allied forces and World War II entered its final months. Early that year, British soldiers closed in on Japanese troops occupying Ramy Island, located off the Burmese, now Myanmar coast in the Bay of Bengal. The battle raged on for 6 exhausting weeks until the British outflanked the Japanese, isolating around 1,000 soldiers and dividing the group into 2. The trapped soldiers faced 2 choices: surrender to the enemy, who now had the upper hand, or attempt an 8-mile trek across the island's muddy mangrove swamp, infested with crocodiles, where they would be reunited with the rest of the soldiers on the other side. They chose to take their chances, while the British chose wisely not to follow them. Right from the start, the soldiers encountered dehydration, starvation, mosquitoes, and venomous reptiles. Further into the swamp, they crossed paths with hungry, nocturnal saltwater crocodiles. Perhaps the crocodiles could feel their weakness, or the noise as they trekked through the waters with their injuries attracted them. But what happened next was terrifying. British naturalist Bruce Stanley Wright, who participated in the Battle of Ramy, wrote a written account of the experience, describing the scattered rifle shots in the pitch-black swamp, punctured by the screams of the wounded men crushed in the jaws of huge reptiles, and a cacophony of hell that has rarely been duplicated on Earth. The British could only hear what was happening, and there was no way they were going to help the enemy. While it's unknown exactly how many men died from crocodile attacks, since they also perished from other causes during the ordeal, estimates say that around 480 survived. Stalked by a cougar. A man named Kyle Burgess recently encountered what he thought were two little bobcats while out for a run in Slate Canyon, Utah. He took out his phone and started to record a video of the cats and got a little too close. Turns out they were cougar cubs, and their mommy was not happy. Seconds later, she flies out of the bushes and starts running towards the hiker. The panicked man immediately began backing off and tried scaring the protective mama away, growling and hissing at her between yelling loudly, "Go away!" He continues to walk backwards, always facing her because he says that as soon as he would look down for a rock or something to throw, she would charge at him and get even closer. He keeps trying to yell at her to go back to her cubs as he backs away, and you can hear him start to get tired and a little bit scared. It went on and on for 6 minutes as the cougar stalked Burgess, whose pleas for her to leave him alone fell on deaf ears. "Come on, dude," the exasperated athlete says at one point during the video. "I don't feel like dying today." It seems like finally he got far enough away to get some distance between himself and the cougar and was able to reach for a rock. She finally relented and ran away. He explained his defensive tactics, including his decision not to run from the feline, in an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper, stating, "I felt like if I did anything sooner, she would have felt like I was attacking her baby cubs, and it would have ended a lot differently." His thinking was on point. A video posted to the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources Facebook page following the encounter cautions against fleeing from a cougar. As soon as you turn around, they might jump on your head. Instead, a person should slowly back away, stand tall, wave their arms or jacket in the air, and use a loud, firm voice. All the things that Burgess did. Wild monkeys versus park rangers. Park rangers at a national forest have practically given up on trying to protect tourists from wild monkeys called macaques. They have actually resorted to using slingshots, flinging projectiles at the protected monkeys. Located at the Zhangjiajie National Forest Park in central China's Hunan province, footage of a ranger aiming the weapon toward the forest went viral on Chinese social media, sparking widespread outrage among activists and prompting reporters to reach out to park officials. The park confirmed that the rangers are indeed using slingshots to prevent macaque attacks on humans, which officials claimed happens regularly. The monkeys at the park attack the tourists almost on a daily basis, a spokesperson told the Chinese news website Feidan. In an earlier interview, the park admitted that most attacks resulted from people feeding the primates, which is against the rules. After the monkeys are fed, they often follow the feeders and even snatch food from tourists, explained site manager Shang Li. The park visitor who filmed the disturbing video can be heard asking one of the rangers who ordered them to use the slingshot on the animals, to which the staff member replied, "The Environmental Protection Departments," the Daily Mail reported. The park spokesperson defended the unconventional strategy, pointing out that the plastic projectiles that the slingshots use don't actually harm the macaques. And while not everyone was happy with the idea, some internet users appear to support it, citing first-hand experience with the allegedly aggressive creatures. At this reserve, people often come to take a stroll and enjoy nature, but the monkeys will snatch other things besides food, too. A boy was playing with a toy while out on a walk with his father and dropped it. A monkey came and grabbed it, so the boy chased after it right into the whole group, which then attacked the boy and started scratching and biting him. His father came to his aid and was also attacked, with the monkeys now after both of them. The father said it was pretty terrifying and didn't stop until a security guard came to the rescue. Not sure if he had a slingshot. Thailand is also having some big monkey problems. The historic city of Lopburi is under siege by crab-eating macaques. Their growing population is terrorizing the human community by threatening to destroy property or bite anyone who gets in the way.
the Buddhist community would leave out a lot of food offerings, which would be eaten by the monkeys. Since the coronavirus lockdown, the monkeys have gotten hungry and more aggressive. A woman was almost bitten while waiting in line at the bank, so a police officer came over with a slingshot to scare it away. They wander into stores, chewing on things, stealing things, climb into pickup trucks at stoplights, and attack fruit stands like a gang. There is little to do to fend off the macaques, and the people are worried about how to get their town back. What do you think these places should do about their monkey problem? Do you think slingshots are a good idea, or is it too harsh? Let me know what you would do in the comments below. It seems mean, but I would be pretty scared if I was getting surrounded by a gang of monkeys. Hungry young buck. It's often tempting to feed an adorable wild animal, especially one that appears distressed. But as this example shows, a seemingly harmless act motivated by good intentions can quickly backfire on the community. While walking her dog in the Black Forest area of El Paso County, Colorado, a woman was approached by a deer. Assuming the creature wanted a harmless cuddle, she reached toward him, only to receive a sharp jab in the abdomen from his antlers in return. When she realized she was under attack, the victim said she dropped her dog, grabbed the deer's antlers, and she and the animal fell to the ground, Colorado Parks and Wildlife said in a statement. It gored her until she was able to regain her feet. The deer followed the woman, attacking her again as she ran to her garage, punched in the security code, and wedged herself between two cars, making herself inaccessible to the animal. She received medical treatment for cuts to her head, cheek, and legs. After the attack, a deer with blood-covered antlers approached a CPW officer outside the victim's home. To protect local residents from becoming the creature's next target, the officer euthanized it. Disturbing details that possibly explain the deer's fearlessness of humans soon came to light. As it turns out, at least one of the victim's neighbors was known to feed the 1.5-year-old buck and is suspected of raising the animal after he became orphaned. CPW announced plans to issue a citation to the suspect once the investigation concludes. This is another sad example of what happens when people feed wildlife, said CPW Area Wildlife Manager Frank McGee. They become habituated to people, lose their fear, and become aggressive and dangerous. This is why it is illegal to feed deer and why we urge people to make them feel uncomfortable in neighborhoods. Remember, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The disturbing incident was the latest in an apparent uptick of deer attacks against humans. Just months earlier, a deer was euthanized after approaching a 5-year-old boy in his yard and hitting him with his hooves. In this case, CPW officials also suspected that the attack resulted from people feeding the deer, making it dangerously comfortable around humans. Even if they are partially domesticated, they are unpredictable and doesn't mean that they will be nice and friendly looking for hugs. Rabid raccoon. In what can be best described as a parent's worst fear, a young child in Arlington, Massachusetts was recently bitten by a rabid raccoon. Police responded to a call on October 14th about an animal attacking a child. The incident happened in the family's backyard, where a large raccoon approached the little one and began scratching and biting its victim. The kid's mother chased the offending party away and dialed 911. The victim, who is less than 5 years old, was taken to the hospital and received treatment for their injuries. Thankfully, the prognosis was good, with doctors concluding that the child will be okay. Meanwhile, police searched the area for the raccoon and found the suspect a little over an hour later. The creature was lethargic, a telltale sign of rabies, and was humanely euthanized. Animal Control reported to the scene and collected the specimen for rabies testing. The results were positive, prompting officials to remind the public to be cautious and vigilant. Rabies is a serious virus that attacks the brain and spinal cord. Victims must receive medical care before they become symptomatic. Otherwise, rabies is almost always fatal. Only 14 people are known to have survived rabies after showing symptoms, enduring a long, arduous road to recovery. Gianna Giese, the first person to survive rabies without a vaccination, spent 6 days in a medically induced coma and 75 days in the hospital after being bitten by an infected bat at age 15. She presented to the ER 3 weeks after the incident and near death. By shutting down her brain and administering antiviral drugs, doctors gave Gianna's body a chance to develop antibodies and combat the disease. The teen miraculously survived, but the healing process was no picnic. She had to relearn how to walk, talk, and perform basic functions. It took several months for Gianna to regain her cognitive functions and about a year for her to recover her other lost abilities. Grizzly bear versus fisherman. A group of anglers in Alaska were attacked by a bear earlier this year. A fishing guide was taking some people to a nearby stream that is also popular with male grizzly bears. The guide says that they typically stay out of each other's way, but something had angered this grizzly and they suddenly heard a growl right next to them. They were talking loudly as they walked to warn animals of their presence, but the bear must have been sleeping, and you know what they say. The sleeping bear must have jumped up and charged. A woman fell down and the bear lunged at her right as the guide pulled out his gun and shot it. She said that it was close enough to almost bite her face. He struck the animal with 7 shots, and he says that it was the first time this had ever happened to him in his career. In Alaska, if you kill a bear in self-defense, you must report it immediately. What would you have done in this situation? Do you think they could have done something differently? Let me know in the comments below. In another story, also in Alaska, some unsuspecting fishermen were standing right on the riverbank with their lines in the water when a huge bear appeared right behind them. Luckily, this encounter was peaceful, and it looks like the bear was just sniffing around for some salmon. Bears walk up and down the bank all day, searching for fish, and if they see something, they will splash into the water to try and get it. Katmai National Park in Alaska has strict rules to keep bears and humans safe. Most importantly is that they require all food to be stored in special canisters, so the animals never taste people food. While there are often peaceful encounters of bears with humans, the park still warns that they are wild and unpredictable. The bear in this case took a look at what the fishermen were doing and just lumbered on down the bank. Fatal tiger encounter. In late September, a tiger attacked and killed a 60-year-old woman in the western Indian state of Maharashtra. The attack occurred in a field between 2 villages, Patanbori and Andharwadi, and the offender decided to hang around for a while afterward. The tiger sat at the area after the kill for a long time before locals could retrieve the body and send it for a post-mortem examination, a forest official said. In the days leading up to the attack, the big cat was seen throughout various villages in the forest reserve, and it is also thought to be responsible for attacking a farmer who was injured but survived. Big cat attacks appear to be on the rise in India in recent years, likely due to humans and wildlife living in increasingly close proximity to one another. In early October, a so-called problem tiger, known simply as RT1, claimed its 8th victim, a senior citizen named Maroti Pendam. The 70-year-old was mauled to death after entering the forest to collect firewood. Concerned locals found the missing man's partially eaten remains early the next day. A dedicated team of trackers works tirelessly to monitor tigers' whereabouts, and a special committee is tasked with assessing the dangerousness of big cats who attack people and decides whether to capture them for the sake of public safety. USS Indianapolis shark attack. The USS Indianapolis left Guam in late July 1945 after delivering crucial bomb components to the Pacific island of Tinian. Their mission was quite important as these components were later used in the atomic bomb that the US military dropped on Hiroshima. But as the ship traveled toward the Philippines, a Japanese submarine fired 2 torpedoes into the ship, causing the vessel to sink in just 12 minutes. Around 300 of the 1,196-person crew went down with the ship. The 900 survivors spent the next several days stranded at sea, battling dehydration, sun exposure, starvation, and shark attacks. Some men caved and drank salty seawater in a desperate attempt to quench their unbearable thirst, causing terrifying hallucinations, followed by death. Corporal Edgar Harrell described the terrifying ordeal in a 2014 interview with the Indy Star, stating, "The first morning we had sharks, and then you hear a blood-curdling scream, and then the body would go under, and then that life vest popped back up." Experts believe that the oceanic white-tip shark species is primarily responsible for the attacks due to its inherent aggressiveness. The predators were attracted by the sounds of the explosions, the frantic thrashing crowd, and the smell of blood, Natasha Galing wrote in a 2014 Smithsonian Magazine article. As the survivors continued struggling, they drew more sharks to the scene. Rescue operations commenced after a Navy plane spotted the soldiers, who were still surrounded by sharks. By then, only 317 of the 900 initial survivors remained. If you want to learn more, there are many documentaries and interviews of the survivors. Maybe just don't watch it right before you go to bed. Thanks for watching! Stay safe and remember to admire wildlife from a distance and try not to poke a sleeping bear or tiger. Remember to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and give this video a thumbs up to let me know you want to see more videos like these. See you next time. Bye!